My name is Evelyn May Harrington, and I am 76 years old. For most of my life, I was the woman who held every holiday together. The turkey carver at Thanksgiving, the ribbon tear at Christmas, the peacemaker when voices grew sharp across the dinner table. My late husband, Charles, used to call me the glue of the family. But one evening, standing in my daughter's living room, I realized they no longer saw me as glue. They saw me as clutter. It happened on a Sunday. I had brought over a peach cobbler, the kind my grandson Thomas always begged for, the kind that made my kitchen smell like cinnamon and warm butter. I walked into their house, set the cobbler down, and something inside me froze. The family wall, the wall where every memory lived, was bare of me. My wedding photo, the one where Charles kissed me under a shower of rice, gone. The framed picture of me holding my first grandchild, vanished. My face had been erased. Every smile, every sacrifice, every year of my life that built this family, had been taken down as if I'd never existed. I swallowed the lump in my throat. My daughter, Julia, was pouring wine into tall glasses, her back to me. My son-in-law, Marcus, laughed about some business deal. No one mentioned the missing photos. No one looked at me. I forced myself to smile, to play the part I'd always played. But inside, I was trembling. They didn't just take down my pictures, they had taken down my place in their hearts. That night, as I sat alone in my quiet little house with the cobbler untouched beside me, something cracked. Not just in me, but in the bond one thought was unbreakable. And that's when I made a decision, one that would change everything. I would build a new wall. But not the kind they could take down. Not in a house where they held the keys. This wall, they would never be able to enter. When you get to my age, memories don't fade, they sharpen. Every disappointment, every little betrayal, it comes back like a photograph you didn't know was still in the drawer. The night they took my photo off the wall wasn't the beginning. No, the first crack in our family bond appeared years earlier, when Charles passed away. Charles was the love of my life. We met at a church picnic in 1968. Me in a yellow sundress, him with a crooked smile that made my knees buckle. We built everything together. A small house in the suburbs of Greenville, South Carolina, a garden that grew wild with tomatoes and roses, and 2 children we poured our whole lives into. When cancer took him 10 years ago, I thought my children would step closer. Instead, they stepped back. I remember Julia, my daughter, saying in a soft but distant voice, "Mom, you're strong. You'll be fine." I wasn't fine. The nights were hollow, the mornings too long. But I swallowed my grief, cooked dinners for them, knitted blankets for the grandchildren, and smiled as if nothing was broken inside me. Because that's what mothers do. We patch ourselves up so no one else has to. The problem was, they got used to it. Used to me never asking, never needing, always giving. I became invisible. The first time I realized how invisible I'd become was at Julia's new housewarming party. Everyone was buzzing, neighbors, co-workers, friends. My son, Daniel, bragged about his law firm. Julia flaunted her remodeled kitchen. And me. I was standing by the punch bowl, holding a plate of deviled eggs I had made, and no one even looked my way. Not until one of Julia's friends whispered, "Oh, that's your mom? She looks sweet." Sweet. Not strong. Not important. Just sweet, like a doily tucked under a lamp. That night, when I went home, I sat in my kitchen and whispered to Charles' old chair, "They don't see me anymore, love." But I brushed it aside, told myself they were busy, told myself family always comes around. I kept giving. I kept believing. Until slowly, the giving became expected, and the believing became foolish. And years later, when I saw that bare wall, it was the confirmation of everything I had feared. But what my children didn't know was this. I might have been invisible in their home, but I was far from powerless. Because the woman they erased, she still had a few secrets left. The night after the photos disappeared from Julia's wall, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it creak with every turn. My chest ached, not from age, but from the hollowness of being erased. I got up, wrapped myself in Charles' old cardigan, and shuffled into the kitchen. On the table sat a stack of unopened letters, insurance updates, pension notices, brochures from retirement communities. Normally, I shoved them into a drawer, too tired to deal with them. But that night, I opened every single one. It was like a door creaked open in my mind. For years, I'd let Julia handle my bills, let Daniel advise me about investments. They said it was to help me. But staring at those papers, I realized they weren't helping, they were controlling. I picked up the phone and called the one person who had never treated me like I was fragile. Her name was Marjorie Quinn, my childhood best friend. She lived 2 towns over on a small ranch, still strong, still stubborn, still painting her nails fire engine red at 80. "Evelyn May," she said the moment she answered, her voice crackling with life. "Do you know what time it is?" "I know," I whispered, my throat thick. "But Marjorie, I think my children don't want me in their lives anymore." There was silence for a long second, then a sharp reply. "Then build a life without them." I laughed through the tears. "At my age?" "At any age," she said firmly. "They took you off the wall. Fine. Build a wall of your own. Something they can't touch." Her words struck me like a match in the dark. Build a wall of my own. Not a real wall of bricks and stone, but something bigger, something lasting. The next morning, I sat in my garden with a notebook and a cup of tea. I listed everything I had ever sacrificed. Holidays missed, dreams postponed, money given, pride swallowed. And then I wrote down a promise. They may have erased me from their walls, but I will carve my name into something they cannot erase. That was the beginning. The spark of defiance. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt dangerous. 2 days after my call with Marjorie, I found myself standing in the lobby of First Palmetto Bank, clutching my leather handbag like a lifeline. The young man at the counter, his name tag said Ethan, smiled politely, probably thinking I was just another old woman cashing a pension check. But I wasn't there for small change. I was there to take my life back. For years, Julia had helped manage my accounts. She had the online passwords, she handled the transfers. At first, I was grateful. But lately, I noticed little things. Automatic drafts I never approved, savings accounts closed without explanation, and Daniel's voice in my ear saying, "Don't worry, Mom, we've got it handled." Well, not anymore. "I'd like to update my account access," I told Ethan, my voice steady. No one but me, is to control my funds from now on." He looked surprised but nodded quickly. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington. We can reset everything." As he typed, I watched the screen reflect in his glasses. Each click was like the sound of chains snapping loose. When he slid the new paperwork across the counter, I signed with a hand that didn't shake. For the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. When I walked out of the bank, the sun felt different on my skin, warmer, sharper, as if the world had shifted. I stopped at a little diner down the street and ordered myself a slice of pecan pie, celebrating quietly, like a soldier after a small victory. Later that evening, Julia called. Her voice was tight, suspicious. "Mom, I just got a notification that the account changed. Why didn't you tell me?" I let the silence hang. Then I said calmly, "Because, Julia, it's my account. My money. My life. And I don't need permission to live it." The line went quiet. Then came a sharp exhale, the kind she used when she didn't get her way. She muttered something about not being dramatic and hung up. But I wasn't dramatic. I was deliberate. That night, sitting in my armchair, I sketched something new in my notebook. Not just a list this time. A plan. My new wall wasn't just about money, it was about freedom. About creating a place, a legacy, that no one could take down. And if my children thought they could erase me, they were about to learn that Evelyn May Harrington was far from finished. I spent the next week with my notebook always open on the kitchen table. I scribbled between sips of coffee, tore out pages when ideas soured, and circled words like home, legacy, safe, untouchable. The truth was, I didn't just want a wall. I wanted a house of my own making. A place where I decided what went on the walls, what stories were told, whose faces were framed. A house no one could walk into and strip me out of. Marjorie came over one afternoon. plopping a bag of groceries onto my counter like she owned the place. "You look like a woman plotting a revolution," she teased, eyeing my notebook. "Maybe I am," I said, smiling for the first time in days. "I'm going to build something, Marjorie. Something that belongs only to me." Her eyes lit up. "You mean like a house?" "Yes," I whispered, almost afraid of the word. "A house. Not big, not fancy, but mine. And on its walls, my life will hang, every picture, every memory. A museum of what they tried to erase." Marjorie slapped the counter. "That's it, Evelyn. That's your revenge. You don't beg for a seat at their table, you build your own table." That night, I called a local realtor, a young woman named Caroline Monroe who spoke with a southern lilt and treated me with respect, not pity. "Mrs. Harrington," she said after listening to my story, "there's an old farmhouse just outside town. Needs love, but it has good bones. I think you'd like it." While I was daring to dream, Julia and Daniel were tightening their grip. Julia called 3 times that week, her tone sharpened with every conversation. "Mom, are you okay? You sound distracted." "I'm fine, Julia." "Fine isn't an answer." "It's the only one I owe you," I replied. Daniel left a voicemail, his lawyer's voice seeping through. "Mom, we should talk about a financial power of attorney. Just for safety. You never know when." I deleted the message halfway through. They thought I was weak, drifting toward dependency. But the truth was, I was building the strongest thing I had ever built in my life. And soon, they would see the first brick of my new wall. The following Saturday, Caroline drove me 20 minutes out of town, past rolling fields and weathered barns, to a gravel road that curved into a grove of pecan trees. At the end of it stood the farmhouse. It wasn't much to look at: peeling paint, shutters hanging by rusted nails, weeds clawing at the porch steps. Most people would have shaken their heads and turned away. But when I stepped out of the car, the air smelled of earth and wood smoke, and something inside me stirred. "This is it," I whispered. Caroline tilted her head. "You haven't even seen inside." "I don't need to," I said. "I can feel it." Still, she led me through the creaking door. Dust floated in the sunlight like tiny ghosts. The floorboards moaned under my shoes. In the living room, an old brick fireplace sat stubborn and unbroken, even as the plaster around it crumbled. My fingertips brushed the mantel, and I imagined Charles' photo resting there again, where no one could take it down. The dining room had faded wallpaper with tiny blue roses. I pictured Thanksgivings here, friends and neighbors gathered, not out of obligation, but out of choice. In the hallway, there were empty walls that begged for my pictures, my history, my proof of life. "This house has good bones," Caroline said gently, watching me. I smiled through the tears that had started to burn my eyes. "So do I." By the time we circled back to the porch, I knew. My knees ached from climbing the stairs, my back throbbed from standing too long, but my spirit felt young again. This wasn't just a house. It was a resurrection. "I'll take it," I said, my voice steady. "Sure." Caroline blinked. "Are you certain? It'll need work, a lot of it." "I've spent my life working," I told her. "Now I'll finally work for myself." That night, as I signed the first set of papers, a strange calm settled over me. I had laid the first stone of my new wall. What I didn't know was that while I was building, my children were already plotting to tear it down. I should have known my children wouldn't stay in the dark for long. Money leaves trails, and trails always lead to nosy eyes. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Julia showed up unannounced, the sharp click of her heels echoing through my front hall like a warning bell. She was holding a printout, her lips pursed. Daniel followed close behind, his tie still knotted from court, his jaw tight. "Mom," Julia said, waving the paper, "what is this?" I set down my teacup slowly, keeping my voice calm. "That's a purchase agreement. For a farmhouse." Daniel's voice cracked with disbelief. "Out in the middle of nowhere?" "Yes." Julia let out a humorless laugh. "You can't be serious. You're 76 years old. You can't even climb a ladder without getting dizzy. Who put this idea in your head?" I folded my hands in my lap. No one put it there. It's mine. Their eyes flickered to each other, that silent sibling language they'd had since childhood. I could see it, fear, calculation, and something uglier, control slipping through their fingers. Daniel sat forward, his lawyer voice steady and cool. Mom, this isn't safe. Houses like that are money pits. And frankly, it looks like you're not making sound decisions anymore. I clenched my jaw. I've been making decisions my whole life, decisions that gave you both everything you have today. Julia's tone sharpened. We're just trying to protect you. No, I said softly, steel in my throat. You're trying to protect your version of me, the quiet, invisible mother who never asks for anything. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Julia slammed the paper onto the table. We'll talk to an attorney. There are ways to prevent this kind of recklessness. And with that, they stormed out, leaving the door rattling in their wake. When the house finally went quiet again, I sat frozen in my chair. My children, the very people I had given my life to, were preparing to fight me for my own freedom. But what they didn't know was that I had already anticipated their move. And I was ready. The morning after Julia and Daniel's little ambush, I woke with fire in my veins. They thought they could scare me back into silence. They thought they could wrap my life in paperwork and signatures like chains. But I had spent too many years being quiet, being sweet. That Evelyn was gone. I dialed Marjorie before breakfast. They're trying to take it all from me, I said, my voice shaking with equal parts fear and fury. She didn't miss a beat. Then you fight back, Evelyn May. You don't let them write the ending of your story. Get yourself a lawyer. So I did. His name was Harold Pierce, a retired attorney in town who had known Charles back in the day. He was in his late 70s, still sharp, still carrying that old Southern courtesy in his voice. When I explained everything, he leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. They'll likely argue incompetence, Harold said, matter of fact. They'll say you can't manage your affairs. I swallowed hard. Can they win? Not if you get ahead of them. He slid a paper across the desk. This is a living trust. It makes every decision yours, and yours alone. It names beneficiaries on your terms, not theirs. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling for just a moment. Then I signed. Every loop of my signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. When I left his office, Marjorie was waiting outside with 2 hard hats she'd borrowed from her cousin. She grinned like a mischievous child. Well, you ready to see your house? And so we drove back to the farmhouse, our laughter echoing down the gravel road. Inside, the dust and cobwebs no longer looked like decay. They looked like a challenge. Marjorie grabbed a broom and swatted at the ceiling. I tore old wallpaper with my bare hands, the blue roses giving way to blank walls that begged for new stories. By the end of the day, we were covered in dirt and sweat, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was creating. And as I stood in the middle of that half-ruined living room, looking at the light spilling through broken shutters, I realized something. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a fortress. And on its walls, my children's erasure would never touch me again. The farmhouse smelled of fresh paint and lemon oil when the letter arrived. I had spent the morning hanging curtains Marjorie found at a thrift store, humming to myself as I pinned the fabric in place. For the first time in a long while, I felt settled. But then I saw the envelope on the porch. Heavy paper. My name typed in bold black ink. Inside was a letter that made my blood run cold. Notice of petition for guardianship. Julia and Daniel weren't bluffing. They were taking me to court, claiming I was no longer capable of managing my affairs. They wanted control of my finances, my property, my life. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. My children, my flesh and blood, were preparing to declare me incompetent. When Marjorie arrived later that afternoon, I shoved the papers toward her. She read them with a tight jaw, then looked up at me. They've declared war, Evelyn May. I nodded slowly. Then I'll fight like hell. That night, I called Harold Pierce. He didn't sound surprised. I figured this was coming, he said. But you're stronger than they think. We'll fight it. We'll prove you're as competent as ever. I smiled grimly. More than competent. Determined. The next day, instead of shrinking into fear, I doubled down on the farmhouse. I hired a handyman, a kind man named Luis Alvarez who treated me with respect, not pity. Together, we repaired the porch steps and patched the roof. I paid for every nail, every brushstroke with my own money. Money Julia and Daniel would never touch again. Each improvement was more than just repair. It was proof. Proof that I was building, not losing. Proof that my life was still mine to shape. But in the quiet moments, when the tools were put away and the house grew still, the ache returned. Not for freedom, that I had. The ache was for the simple truth. The people I loved most were preparing to stand against me in public, to paint me as a burden, a fool. I looked around at the bare walls of the farmhouse and whispered to Charles' memory. They think they can erase me. But I will outlast them. I will outshine them. And when this is over, they will know, Evelyn May Harrington does not vanish. The battle lines were drawn. And the final war was waiting. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where lives were reshaped by signatures and gavels. I sat at the front table beside Harold Pierce, my back straight, my silver hair pinned neatly. Across the aisle, Julia and Daniel whispered to their attorney, their eyes darting at me with a mix of pity and determination. The judge, a stern woman with sharp glasses, called the room to order. We are here to discuss the petition for guardianship over Mrs. Evelyn May Harrington. Julia went first. She spoke about my age, my confusion, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern. Daniel added legal phrases like best interests and capacity in question. To the strangers in that room, they sounded like devoted children. But I knew better. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, every bone in my body protesting, but my spirit lifting me higher. Harold placed a folder in my hands, and I walked toward the judge. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. My children believe I'm incapable of managing my life. But let me show you what they don't see. I handed the judge photographs, freshly printed images of the farmhouse. The porch restored, the kitchen walls bright with new paint, the fireplace mantel adorned with framed memories of Charles and the children they were trying to erase. Each photo told a story, not of decline, but of rebirth. This is my home, I said. I bought it with my own money. I hired the workers, I signed every contract, I managed every detail. That wall right there, I pointed to a photo of the living room, is where my family pictures hang. Pictures my children once removed, thinking they could erase me. But here, in my house, no one can take them down. The judge studied the photos for a long moment. Then she looked at me, not as an old woman, but as a person standing tall in her truth. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm. Petition denied. Mrs. Harrington is fully capable of managing her own affairs. The gavel struck, and with it, the chains my children tried to wrap around me shattered. Julia's face crumpled in shock. Daniel clenched his jaw, his lawyer's mask slipping. For the first time in years, I didn't see them as my protectors or even my betrayers. I saw them as children, grown, yes, but still blind to the strength of the woman who raised them. I walked out of that courtroom with Marjorie at my side, the autumn sun warming my face. And when we drove back to the farmhouse, I stepped into my living room and looked at the wall covered in photos. Charles' smile, my children as babies, me holding my grandchildren. My story. My proof. My wall. They had taken me down once. But now, I had built a wall in a house they could never enter. And this time, I wasn't just hanging pictures. I was hanging my victory.